Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to try to convince you that using stored procedures is a much better practice than using SQL in your application code. Now, you're probably used to using different languages, Java, C#, JavaScript. You could just pick your language and insert it here. And in that language, you can embed SQL. You can embed SQL in functions to do things like, for example, insert a record into a table, delete a record, update a record, or do what have you. And then you could write some application code that executes that query. Not uncommon. Like I mentioned, you could do this in just about any language where you can put your SQL directly within the code. But the problem with that, though, is it's hard to actually maintain that code all in one spot. It's a lot easier to take that code, to insert, update, and delete, or what have you, and put it as a stored procedure. Mostly because if you put it in the database, it's going to be executed in one spot. For example, let's just say you have like a complex query. So let's just say you have a query that does a variety of things, or maybe you have a variety of queries that do inserts, updates, and deletes. So if you put that SQL in your code, it's going to be harder to maintain and harder to debug. So you can take that as business logic, and then you could put it within your stored procedure. So here I have an example where you have update, insert, and delete. We can take these SQL statements and put them all in a stored procedure where they're maintained in one spot, and the stored procedure can be called from, a calling program. So let's just say we have, a situation where we want to like populate an audit table, a history table, or have complex validation. In these three scenarios, it would be difficult to put the SQL in your application logic to do these things. Not impossible, but think about it. It would have to be all in different functions. It would have to be embedded in your code. And what I can do is, rather than do that, is I could put all of that logic into a stored procedure. So now I'm separating my application, pardon me, not my application code, but my operations that my SQL are doing, and I'm putting them all in stored procedures. So this is a better way to do it, because I could have my application program now just call my stored procedure rather than having a bunch of SQL statements that are directly, within my application code. Also, it allows us to control the business logic in one spot. So if I have, for example, a stored procedure that inserts an employee, updates an employee, deletes an employee, I can maintain all that code in the stored procedures on the right and just call that from each module. Now, these modules can be in any language, right? It could be in Java, C#, JavaScript, Visual Basic, Power Builder, anything, where I can just call that stored procedure that does that business logic. And in addition to calling it from the module, what I can do is I can just maintain it in one spot. Also, it's going to be helpful for other systems as well. So rather than having my application, having all this cluttered code in it, what I can do is I can have the application call the stored procedure, and the stored procedure exists in the database. This is a lot easier for these applications to do so because there's less code, usually just one or two lines for these applications to call the stored procedure, than not to do that, and to use the alternative, which is to use SQL within an application. And here the stored procedure is over the cookie jar I have there for the database, just to denote that the stored procedure is really a database piece of code. So in this scenario here, I got an application calling a stored procedure in the database. The application code is maintained independently of the stored procedures. I can have database developers that just build the code for stored procedures, and the application developers do the application. It also simplifies. For example, if I had raw SQL, if I'm updating a customer, look where I gotta kind of concatenate the string. Now in a stored procedure, all I need to do is just basically call the stored procedure. Like here, I can have a line of code that just specifies the stored procedure, and then in the application code, I got one line here, connection run query. So the stored procedure is actually, this isn't the stored procedure, but this is an example of a stored procedure being called from an application. It's a lot more easy to maintain, isn't it? Now, it's got its drawbacks too. It's, for example, version controlling is a little bit harder. I mean, for in this case, you're going to have the application code different than the database code. So as the application code migrates forward, the database code might not. So you're going to have to kind of consider version control and make sure that you're using the correct versions. That could be an advantage too, but mostly I think it's a disadvantage because the SQL now, being in a stored procedure, isn't really migrated or versioned as the application code is. But the application code, you might have version 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and the stored procedure might be the same. So you're going to have to get used to different versions calling each other. You might have application code version 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, but the stored procedure might not migrate at all. And like I said, that might be a bit of an advantage too, because you might want to debug these. Second of all, it's tough to actually get this through to application developers, because if I'm a Java developer, I want to do everything in Java. I don't want to put stuff in Oracle or in a database anywhere, because I'm like, I know what I want the SQL to do, and therefore I can write the code to do that. But that's not that hard to do once you show them the advantages of separating the logic. And another advantage of this is, like for example, if you have like vendor-specific features, it could be a disadvantage that you're kind of locked in to a specific database vendor. But I also have as an advantage that could be really a moot point, because generally moving enterprise systems from database vendors is fairly rare. It's not that common. I mean, it definitely doesn't happen every year. It might happen a couple times in a generation where you move away from a database, but it can be a disadvantage if you start putting some stored procedures in the database. Again, more of a consideration than this is why you shouldn't do it. But remember that if you start putting code in the database, you're kind of locked into that database. Make sure you're not going to be changing it. But I have in the last sentence there, that might not even be an issue. So anyway, I have here just to kind of sum up what I've been doing here, is I've been giving you like a high-level design lecture on stored procedures versus SQL. Also, just want to point out that if you have stored procedures, you can version it in source control, such as GitHub. Anyway, if possible, use stored procedures over embedded SQL. Thank you for listening, and have a great rest of your day.